Have you ever felt exhausted from having to explain yourself to the world? Ever wished you could remain silent, yet still be respected, still carry influence? Perhaps it's time we learn to speak less so we can live more deeply. In a world overwhelmed by noise, people assume that the loudest voice leads the way, but the Stoic walks a different path. They understand that silence is not weakness. It is often the pinnacle of disdain, a quiet declaration. I don't need to speak to prove my worth. Today, we'll uncover 10 virtues of those who speak little, those who need no volume to command the world's attention. 1. Silence reveals the other, a mirror to the opponent's mind. We often assume that to understand someone, we must ask questions, engage in endless dialogue, slowly peeling back layers to uncover the truth. But the Stoic does not force revelation. Instead, they wield silence like a mirror, reflecting what the other person tries to hide or has yet to see within themselves. Strangely, it is when we choose not to speak that the other is compelled to reveal their truth. They can't endure the void. The silence unsettles them, even frightens them. And in that discomfort, the truth begins to spill bit by bit. In ordinary conversation, the one who speaks most believes they are in control. But in reality, the greatest power lies in the silence of the one who listens. When we resist the urge to respond, interrupt, or assert ourselves, the other feels pressure to fill the space. They keep talking, far more than necessary. That's when they begin to expose their motives, their fears, and at times their pretenses. They cannot tolerate the quiet, for in it there is no foothold, no reaction to latch onto, no signal to recalibrate their behavior. And like speaking into a mirror, they start to see themselves, perhaps for the first time. This silence is not passive or submissive. It is a deliberate strategy, a conscious choice born of inner strength. The Stoic does not hold their tongue out of fear, but from wisdom, understanding that speaking is not always the wise path. Through silence, they grant themselves time to observe the atmosphere, the body language, the eyes, and especially what lies beneath the words. While others scramble to dominate with speech, the Stoic commands through presence, silent, sharp, and unworrying. We live in a world that prizes quick replies and instant reactions, and that is why intentional silence has become so rare and so powerful. It renders us unreadable, unknowable, and in that uncertainty, others begin to reveal their own. Like in a game of chess, when we move too quickly and too often, the opponent can predict us. But when we pause, truly think before we move, they begin to question their own strategies. Silence exerts an invisible pressure, the pressure of the unknown, the pressure of being unable to predict. There is a particular kind of silence in conflict, when someone lashes out, waiting for a reaction, and all they receive is a calm gaze and unbroken stillness. They falter. They don't know what to do next. No one can sustain aggression against an unmoving wall. Gradually, their anger dissolves into the quiet, and the one who remains silent stands unshaken, needing no words to defend their honor. For they know that self-control is the strongest armor. Silence reveals essence. In my own life, I've witnessed countless moments where saying nothing made others confess far more than they intended. Whether in private conversation, negotiation, or comforting someone in grief, sometimes the most powerful thing is simply being there, listening with presence, with your eyes, with your heart. The one in pain opens up. The one hiding begins to remove the mask. And it all starts with silence. The beautiful truth is, this kind of silence can be trained by cultivating the habit of not reacting instantly, by learning to pause 3 seconds before replying, by observing a conversation without needing to dominate it. And each time we do this, we strengthen an invisible force, a power that doesn't shout, but earns respect. It is the quiet majesty of calm, the fortitude of inner resolve, the very virtue Stoicism reminds us of. Never let others steer your mind with their words. Let your silence guide them instead. 2. Silence is a filter of the mind. Not every thought deserves to be spoken. There is something most of us overlook. The majority of what we say each day is not truly necessary. We speak out of habit, out of the urge to respond, out of discomfort with silence. But the Stoic approaches things differently. They treat silence as a mental filter, a sieve that separates what should be said from what must be kept. Not every thought that crosses the mind deserves to become sound, and not every word spoken makes the world better. On the contrary, much of it only adds to the noise of an already chaotic society. We live in an age where feedback is expected instantly. A social media post, a sudden message, a casual question, they all seem to demand an immediate reply, something to say, proof that we are present. But in this urgency, we lose the ability to discern. We speak to fill the void, not to offer value. The Stoic, on the other hand, chooses to pause. They use silence as a cushion for thought, a space where emotional impulses are filtered out, leaving only what is measured and meaningful. Picture your mind as muddy water after a storm. Keep stirring it, and it never clears, but leave it still, and in time, everything settles. Clarity returns. Silence works the same way. It allows emotions to settle, giving way to clearer thinking. Only then, if words are needed at all, do they emerge like polished stones, untouched by the sediment of rash emotion. The quiet person is not without thoughts. On the contrary, they have much to share, but they choose carefully what is truly worth saying. To them, speech is a gift, not a reflex. They don't spend words as if they were endless, but use them as if each one holds weight. That's why when they speak, people listen, because the wisdom behind their words can be felt, not just heard. I once fell into the trap of thinking I had to respond right away. In work, in relationships, I constantly felt the need to meet expectations by saying something fast, even when I hadn't fully understood the situation. What came of it? Thoughtless words that worsened the problem, hurt others, or left me with regret. Only when I learned to sit with the silence, even the awkward few seconds at the start, did I begin to understand. Not responding right away is not weakness, but strength. Some things are better held back, to observe, to understand more deeply, or simply to say nothing at all. The Stoic believes true power lies not in convincing others, but in mastering the self. In silence, we are not led by fleeting emotions. We don't feel compelled to win every conversation. We allow wisdom to rise and speak only when it serves clarity, not conquest. Silence also reconnects us with ourselves. When the noise fades, when distractions vanish, we can finally hear the voice within, the one drowned out by the world's clamor. That's when we ask, what am I really feeling? Am I speaking truth or just reacting to fear? The answers rarely come from outside, but from the stillness we create within. And finally, what I've come to realize most deeply on this Stoic path is that silence is not the absence of speech, but a profound form of presence. A person may speak little, yet leave a lasting mark because they choose their moment, their place, their purpose. They don't speak to impress, but to transform. And sometimes it's their silence that gives others the most to reflect on. 3. Silence is natural magnetism. The quiet one stirs the world's curiosity. In a world where everyone is trying to be noticed, to be seen, to impress with eloquent words or flashy displays, the one who chooses silence becomes the outlier, yet also the one who stands out most. We often assume that to attract others, We must speak often, prove our charm, show our brilliance. But the Stoic teaches the opposite. Silence, timed and intentional, holds more gravity than any clever phrase. It's like the silent moon in a sky of flickering stars, not loud, not flamboyant, yet impossible to ignore. There's a curious paradox in human psychology. What's hidden draws more curiosity. The quiet person often leaves a deeper impression than the talkative one, not because they deliberately create distance, but because their silence ignites imagination. We fear silence in conversation, and so, when facing someone who says little, our minds start to race, wondering what they are thinking, whether they are judging us, whether they are hiding something. And just like that, without uttering a word, the silent one becomes the center of attention. The draw of the quiet person isn't in trying to prove anything. It's in their steadiness and inner completeness. They don't need constant expression to feel worthy. That's what makes them mysterious, unpredictable, and quietly magnetic. They don't fill the space with words, but with a presence that feels grounding, intriguing, and ice. They're not the ones entering a room with booming laughter. They are the ones who sit down calmly, and their presence lands like a stone, and felt. In truth, silence itself sends a powerful message. I'm not in a rush. I'm watching. I'm here, and I'm enough as I am. In a world addicted to speed, the one who can sit still, unbothered, unhurried, without needing to add something to the conversation, reveals a deeper kind of strength. They don't need to shine through speech, because their stillness already captures attention, invites questions, and lingers longer than the loudest voices in the room. The Stoic does not remain silent to attract notice. They are silent because it is the nature of the awakened mind, and yet, that very quality sets them apart. Amid a sea of hurried speech, the one who dares to pause, to choose quiet, becomes like a lighthouse in a storm of words. They aren't the ones on stage, but they are the ones you turn to after the curtain falls. They don't compete in volume, but they prevail in depth. When we speak less, we gain more space to observe, to understand, to choose the right moment to speak. And that restraint gives weight to every word we do say. People notice, they remember, they value our speech because they know it wasn't given lightly. To them, the quiet person is like an unopened book. The more concealed, the more compelling. We don't need to strain to be seen. Sometimes it's enough to draw inward, be still, and stand firm like a mountain. And naturally, others will take notice, not because we tried, but because in a world off balance, calm is rare, and rare things are always sought. 4. Silence is inner strength. Stillness is the gym of the mind. True human strength isn't found in muscle, reputation, or applause. It lies in the ability to stay composed in the midst of chaos, and there is no place more effective for building that strength than in stillness. To the Stoic, silence is not merely a communication choice. It is a rigorous form of mental training, where resilience, reason, and awareness are sharpened, much like weights hone a body in the gym. The only difference is that here, what's being lifted are raw emotions, instinctual reactions, and the constant distractions of the outer world. Silence forces us inward, away from the noise of society, away from praise or criticism, away from the endless nudges of social media, news, expectations, and comparisons. And it is precisely in through that moment that our true self emerges. Stillness isn't comfortable. In fact, it exposes all the things we try to escape: fear, insecurity, emptiness, or failure. But just like in physical training, strength is built when we push past the pain. In the same way, only by enduring the discomfort of silence do we forge inner fortitude. The Stoic is not afraid to sit alone, not afraid of silence, because they know it's the only way to lay a solid foundation for thought. In silence, they learn to observe the stream of emotions without being swept away. They don't react impulsively, don't allow anger or anxiety to take the wheel. Each time they face a negative emotion without speaking or acting on it, they build a new layer of strength. These moments accumulate into calm, not the numb kind, but a calm born of deep self-understanding, so stable that nothing can easily shake it. Inner strength comes from knowing what belongs to us and what does not. The Stoic practices this daily. They accept that they cannot control the external, but they have complete control over how they respond. And they train this not when life is peaceful, but in the middle of its mess. When insulted, they choose silence, not out of fear, but because they refuse to let others hijack their emotions. When failure strikes, they don't blame or complain. They reflect, learn, and quietly move forward. In that silence, they rebuild themselves. Like a lion crouching before it leaps. Stillness doesn't mean weakness. It means gathering power for something greater. No one can build true inner strength if they constantly need a crowd to feel validated. In today's world, many measure their worth by likes, views, or comments, but the Stoic measures it by how steady they remain in solitude and silence. They don't need a stage because their real stage is the inner world, where battles are fought between reason and impulse, between instinct and virtue, and every time they choose discipline over retroaction. It's a silent victory, but perhaps the most profound kind of victory. Some forms of strength can't be seen. A person might sit quietly in a crowd saying nothing, drawing no attention, yet carry an energy that others sense and respect. That presence is the result of years of internal training, of hundreds of moments choosing silence over anger, clarity over surrender, understanding over resistance. That kind of stillness is like an invisible wall of steel, unbreakable, because it wasn't built outside, but from within. Silence isn't just the absence of speech. It is the conscious choice not to react. It is a wordless affirmation. I am in control of myself. And in a world spinning out of control where everyone reacts instantly to every trigger, the one who can remain silent becomes a model of strength, the kind of strength that begins with understanding and mastering the self. 5. Silence is the transcendence of ego. No need to boast to prove your worth. In the journey of life, perhaps one of the hardest things to overcome is the ego. The ego urges us to seek recognition, attention, to be heard and admired. It whispers in our ear, speak up, share your achievements, prove you're worthy. And so, many words are spoken not to share, but to validate the self. But to the Stoic, true worth is not proclaimed. It is shown through presence, through action, through the discipline of daily silence. In their eyes, silence is not a lack, but evidence that one has conquered the hunger for acknowledgement. It's not easy to stay silent when you have something to be proud of. When success comes, the instinct is to announce it to the world. Society encourages this, celebrating every achievement, every trip, every meal, every title. But the Stoic walks a different path. They let results speak for themselves. They let time reveal value. They allow silence to testify to their inner stability. And the irony is, this lack of showmanship makes them stand out even more. When everyone is speaking, the one who remains silent becomes the most noticeable. This kind of silence doesn't stem from insecurity or a lack of confidence. On the contrary, it comes from an internal sense of sufficiency, a knowing that one does not need others to confirm their worth. The Stoic has internalized a profound truth. I am not what others think of me. I am what I choose to be, whether seen or unseen. When you no longer depend on recognition to define you, you become free. And in that freedom, there is no need for applause, no desire for the spotlight. You choose silence because truth doesn't need to be shouted to exist. The ego thrives on attention. It feeds on others' reactions, on comparisons, on being noticed. But in silence, the ego has nothing to cling to. It becomes confused. It loses its grip. And if we're patient and awake, we'll see that ego gradually shrink, slowly fade. What remains after the silence is a calmer mind, a person no longer driven to be better than, to defeat, to outshine. It is a rare kind of the freedom from oneself. The Stoic feels no urge to prove anything. They act from virtue, from reason, from alignment with their inner values, not for the sake of crafting a pleasing image for others. They can do good without being seen. They can walk away from pointless debate to protect their peace. They can hear and feel no need to retaliate, for they understand that reaction is the symptom of a fragile ego, while composure is the sign of inner strength. Silence is not weakness. It is the declaration of one who no longer needs to win. The one who chooses silence is not lacking in things to say. They simply understand that not everything known must be expressed. That is the essence of true humility, not the humility that bows its head in pretense, but the kind that has no need to stand up for applause. In the Stoic world, self-mastery is the foundation of dignity, and silence is its purest expression. When we are no longer pulled into the games of ego, we are finally free. And when we no longer feel the need to assert our worth with words, we begin to radiate a quiet strength, the kind that draws attention without effort. 6. Silence as a negotiation tactic. The one who speaks last holds the sharper blade. In the art of negotiation, power doesn't lie in speaking much or speaking fast, but in mastering the rhythm of the conversation. One of the most subtle and effective tactics is using silence as a strategic tool. The Stoic understands this well. They don't see negotiation as a race, but as a chess game, requiring patience, reason, and precise observation. And in that game, silence is the move that unsettles the opponent, exposes their weaknesses, or draws out valuable information they hadn't planned to reveal. When someone rushes to make an offer or respond immediately, they often speak from emotion, pressure, or a desire to control the outcome. In contrast, the one who remains silent creates a necessary void, a space where the other party must sit with their own position. In that space, uncertainty arises, the weight becomes heavy, and the other person tends to keep talking to fill the silence, usually saying more than they should. That's when cracks appear, hidden in each surface, and the balance of power begins to shift toward the one who commands the silence. The Stoic does not speak first in a critical negotiation. They study body language, read emotions, and let the other side reveal as much as possible before responding. They refuse to be rushed, knowing that the impatient one usually loses the upper hand. Their silence is not passive. It's solid presence, a sign of self-mastery and clarity of purpose. They don't chase the conversation. They pursue results, and those results come from letting the other side lay their cards on the table before making a move. In negotiations, every word is a double-edged sword. It can strengthen your stance or weaken it if used carelessly. The one who speaks last holds the advantage. They know what the other side thinks, wants, and fears. Silence gives them time to assess, reposition, and choose the precise moment to engage. And when they finally speak, their words are not impulsive. They come from deep analysis and strategic intent. That's why their words carry more weight, more persuasion, and often determine the outcome. Negotiation isn't just for business or politics. It happens everywhere. in families, at work, in everyday interactions. Wherever there are interests or differences, there is negotiation. And in those moments, the one who can hold their silence holds the power. Not the power to dominate, but to guide the conversation in the most rational and beneficial direction. Silence is not surrender. It is delayed action to ensure that when speech comes, it is armed with strategy and aimed with purpose. The Stoic also knows that silence can cause the other side to question their own position. When you don't react, they begin to wonder, did I say something wrong? What am I missing? Why aren't they responding? These questions create vulnerability and doubt. And right then, the Stoic, who has watched patiently, chooses to speak, briefly but sharply, often enough to shift the balance. Silence is not used to manipulate others, but to avoid being manipulated by emotion, pressure, or the urge to prove oneself right. It's a tool for clarity, a way to separate what is within your control from what is not. In a world where everyone scrambles to speak, strategic silence becomes a supreme weapon, a force that doesn't wound, but can cause others to pause, self-correct, and often find their own way to a resolution without the need for open conflict. 7. Silence is an act of kindness. Listening is a gift that needs no wrapping. In a world where communication moves faster by the day, where most people wait for their turn to speak rather than truly listen, silence becomes a radical act. Not everyone can stay silent, and fewer still know how to use silence to express kindness. But in Stoic philosophy, silence is one of the most dignified ways to show respect for another, because genuine listening is a spiritual gift, one that doesn't need to be wrapped in flowery words or grand gestures. When someone is opening their heart, what they need is not immediate advice, and certainly not interruption, to hear our own stories. They need to be seen, to be heard, to feel fully present in that moment. And the calm, quiet presence of the Stoic offers the perfect response. They don't fill in. They don't rush to reply. They give space and time for the other to speak freely. That silence is an unspoken affirmation. I'm here for you, not to speak, but to understand. Listening is an active practice, not the passive state many mistake it to be. To truly listen, we must practice inner discipline, to resist drifting into our own thoughts, to withhold judgment, to avoid planning a reply before the other has finished. Stoic silence is a mindful presence. It's stepping aside from the ego to make room for another. When we listen with a still mind, without imposition, without haste, the other feels safe, and in that safety, they can speak more honestly, more deeply, and more healing can take place. The Stoic does not treat giving advice as an obligation every time someone opens up. They know that not every problem needs immediate fixing by logic. Sometimes, all a person needs is a silent companion, someone calm enough not to add noise to an already tangled emotion. The right kind of silence can soothe more than 1,000 clever words. In such moments, silence ceases to be a lack of communication. It becomes a noble expression of compassion, one that asks for no recognition, but offers lasting value. When we speak, we repeat what we already know, but when we listen, we open the door to what we do not. The Stoic learns constantly through silence, by receiving experience, emotion, and perspective, without assuming the role of fixer or advisor. They don't place themselves above others, don't rush to label right and wrong. They understand that every story carries its own truth, and listening is the first step toward reaching it. Kindness doesn't live in sweet words, but in the ability to make others feel understood. And understanding only begins when we are patient enough to remain silent. In meaningful conversations, the Stoic shows respect with their eyes, with their full presence, and by holding back judgment. It's their way of saying, I'm not here to win over you, I'm here to know you. And often, that silent presence heals more than any advice could. In a noisy world where everyone wants to be heard, the one who dares to be silent becomes a symbol of compassion. No grand speeches, no dramatic acts, just the simple discipline of not interrupting, not hijacking the moment, not rushing to judgment. That alone creates a sacred space for others to be fully themselves. It's a gift with no wrapping, no label, yet one of the most unforgettable gifts we can give. 8. Silence is the art of observation. Understanding doesn't come from talking, but from paying attention. Within silence lies a unique kind of intelligence, a quiet, profound presence best expressed through the power of observation. The Stoic understands that to comprehend the world, one doesn't need to speak often or insert themselves into every conversation, but rather to step back, observe carefully, and notice what words alone cannot express. True understanding does not arise from long discussions, but from mindful attention during the quietest moments. When we are silent, our eyes sharpen, our minds become more perceptive, and the truths hidden beneath speech begin to reveal themselves. Words are often just surfacey. In conversation, people subconsciously craft images they want others to see. They may speak what they think is true, or what they wish to believe is true, but their body, eyes, hesitations, and breathing patterns often tell a completely different story. The Stoic trains themselves to read these signals, not to judge, but to understand, not to control, but to empathize. And that level of awareness only comes when we stay silent long enough to see the full picture. Rather than chasing every word, silence creates space for multidimensional observation. In a conversation, the one who speaks constantly sees the world only through their own lens. The silent one, however, has a chance to perceive the layers beneath, attitudes, emotions, and motives that lie behind another's words. That's why quiet people often understand more, not because they are smarter, but because they give themselves the time to observe and interpret what is truly unfolding. They don't rush to react. They don't jump to conclusions. They're patient enough to see what the impatient will miss. Observation is not passive. In Stoic thought, it is a vital skill. It demands full presence, not letting the mind drift into past or future, but anchoring it in the now, where the subtlest truths are laid bare. A glance, a tone shift, an unintentional gesture, each carries meaning. And only in silence, when our attention isn't hijacked by the urge to speak, can we perceive these signs with clarity and without bias. The Stoic places no faith in rushed understanding. They believe insight must be distilled over time, through repeated observation and quiet inquiry, not quick conclusions. They don't let personal emotion cloud their perception of reality. And because of this, they avoid missteps, misjudgments, and hasty decisions that might carry long-term consequences. Their silence is not emptiness. It is the foundation from which true discernment grows, not from speaking, but from seeing clearly and understanding deeply. In today's fast-paced world, where speed and efficiency dominate, the ability to pause and observe has become rare. The Stoic doesn't chase that pace. They slow down, not out of laziness, but because they understand that the most important things rarely appear at first glance. Observation takes time, repetition, and lines deep enough to filter out unnecessary noise. And once they've seen enough, their perspective becomes sharp, not to manipulate or dominate, but to act with precision, virtue, and impact. Silent attention doesn't only help us understand others, it also helps us understand ourselves. As we observe others in silence, we also begin to notice our own inner reactions. We see the emotions that arise, the unconscious biases, the habitual responses, and from there, we learn how to govern ourselves. Silence becomes a tool for inner clarity, a mirror that reflects who we truly are, with honesty and without excuse. And through it, the Stoic gradually builds self-mastery from the ground up, not through theory, but through deep, disciplined observation. 9. Silence is the domain of reflective wisdom. Speak less to act with depth. In today's world, where people are encouraged to react quickly, share constantly, and always have something to say, the ability to pause and reflect has become almost a luxury. But in Stoic philosophy, silence is not an empty void. It is fertile ground where deep thinking takes root. It is the space where one meets oneself, organizes scattered thoughts, asks the right questions, and from there, acts with depth instead of reacting on the surface. In this sense, silence becomes the medium for cultivating reflective wisdom, the kind that does not come from absorbing information, but from digesting it, contemplating it, and engaging in an inner dialogue. The Stoic does not act out of emotion. They act after thoughtful consideration. To do that, they need time, space, and a quiet mental environment, undisturbed by external noise. Silence allows them to ask the important questions. Is this truly necessary? Is this the right time? Does this align with the values I live by? What will happen if I speak? What will happen if I don't? These questions cannot be answered in haste, nor can they be addressed clearly when emotion clouds reason. Only in stillness and clarity does reflective wisdom have the chance to function as it should. Not all speech holds value, and not every action reflects initiative. Much of what we say comes from reflex, social pressure, or the habit of wanting to be seen and included. But for the Stoic, what matters is not what is said or done, but why. Does the action serve a higher purpose? They don't let themselves drift with momentum. They choose to respond from awareness, not from impulse, and that process must take place in silence, where the ego is quieted and reason has room to speak. Reflection is not merely an intellectual task. It is also a way to nourish virtue. In silence, the Stoic examines themselves. Did I live rightly today? Did I act with character? What should I change? And what should I continue? This inward turning frees them from the need for external approval and helps build an inner framework of values. They do not live to please others, nor to chase vague expectations. They live to become more complete each day. And silence is the tool that helps them reconnect with life's deepest purpose. Reflective wisdom differs from mere intelligence. Intelligence may argue, persuade, and win, but reflective wisdom is quiet, steady, and not interested in attention. It teaches when to speak and when to remain silent, when to move forward and when to pause. It is the light turned inward, helping us understand ourselves so that decisions are not rash or reactive, but aligned with the whole arc of our life. And importantly, this wisdom cannot grow unless we make space for silence. When silence becomes a habit, one begins to see more clearly the line between what is necessary and what is excessive. Not everything needs to be said. Not every opportunity must be seized. Not every invitation requires an immediate response. Some things are best left alone. Some emotions are best observed. Some situations require stepping back to see the full picture. And all of this becomes possible only when we're not caught in the cycle of constant reaction, but instead enter the stillness where every action, if taken, emerges from mature awareness and inner depth. 10. Silence is a weapon in adversity. The resilient do not complain. There are moments in life when everything seems to collapse at once, when adversity strikes without warning, and a flood of negative emotions resurfaces. Anxiety, disappointment, resentment, pain. In such moments, most people seek an outlet for release, someone to complain to, or a reason to assign blame. But for the Stoic, adversity is not a time to protest. It is an opportunity to forge resilience through silence. In Stoic philosophy, inner strength is not expressed in words, but in the ability to remain quiet, even when everything around is in turmoil. When people complain, they unconsciously hand over control of their lives to forces outside themselves. They admit that their emotions are being ruled by things beyond their grasp. But the Stoic rejects this. They understand that while they cannot control external events, they always control how they respond. And the noblest response to suffering is not to scream, rage, or lament, but to remain quietly composed, a sign of a mind trained not to be broken by hardship. Silence during difficulty does not mean denying emotion or ignoring reality. It means not letting emotion dictate behavior, not letting circumstance obscure reason. While others react impulsively and speak words they will regret, the Stoic chooses to be silent, to observe, to feel, to understand the true nature of the moment. They recognize that not every pain needs to be verbalized, and not every hardship requires sharing to seek sympathy. Some forms of pain are meant to be faced in silence, for it is in that silence that inner strength is awakened. The Stoic believes that in adversity, what matters most is not what happens, but who we become after it passes. Silence is the mark of someone growing from within. They do not seek comfort or validation, because they know neither will remove the storm. They turn inward, rebuild their mindsets, reinforce their beliefs, and move through the trial with steadiness, without noise, without announcement. They do not let hardship erode their will. They use it as fire to forge greater resilience. In truth, complaining solves nothing. It drains the mind, prolongs suffering, and at times undermines the dignity of the one enduring it. The Stoic takes another path, not silence out of despair, but silence to keep the mind from being swept up in the chaos outside. In that silence, they begin to reconstruct their thoughts, refocus on what can be controlled, and act with reason to improve their situation. They know that complaining wastes energy, while silence is the first step toward change. Silence in adversity is also an expression of self-respect. The Stoic does not broadcast their pain to seek attention. They understand that empathy comes from steady action, not from grievance. They know true strength is standing in the storm with a calm face, a clear mind, and unshaken footing. This is not a performance of strength. It is the result of long internal discipline, of a quiet power strong enough to hold oneself, and sometimes others, upright. The resilient do not need to complain because they understand that adversity will pass. But character remains. Each time they stay silent in the face of the storm, they take one more step toward self-mastery. Each time they refrain from speaking in weakness, they preserve their dignity and self-respect. They do not need to prove to anyone that they are enduring. They only need to know they are moving forward, quietly but resolutely. And that is the truest expression of a Stoic soul. Looking back on my journey, I've come to realize that the moments of greatest growth didn't come when I spoke the most, argued best, or proved myself right in a debate. They came when I chose to be silent, not silent out of avoidance, but silent because I understood enough that I no longer needed to prove anything. There were times when I was angry, ready to react, but held back just for a moment. And in that brief pause, I could clearly see that I was no longer being pulled by emotion. I began to see things with greater objectivity. Those moments taught me that silence doesn't make me weaker. It's the foundation upon which real inner strength is built, piece by piece. In everyday life, I began training myself not to react immediately. When I heard criticism, I practiced stepping back for a few seconds. When someone was angry, I chose to say nothing. When things didn't go my way, I no longer complained as I once did. Instead, I let silence lead me toward the question, does this really matter? Is it worth losing my peace over? Those questions helped me stay clear-minded, while others might have lost their bearings. Over time, I came to understand that silence is not the absence of a voice. It is an intentional choice to live with depth, direction, and dignity. If you've made it this far, perhaps there's already a part of you that longs to live more deeply, more mindfully, and more resiliently amid the noise of the world. The journey of mastering yourself through silence is not easy, but every step is worth it. Every moment you choose not to react, every time you listen with patience instead of arguing, every quiet minute spent observing instead of interrupting, each of these is a brick laid in the foundation of inner strength, steadiness, and tristista. If this video spoke to you, feel free to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so we can continue walking this path together in the spirit of Stoic resilience, wisdom, and peace. Choose to live deeply, not loudly. Let your silence become the strongest voice. I'll see you in the next video.